She had written the word plain so many times that it felt stitched into her bones. Plain face, plain figure, plain girl, easy to overlook. Now, standing with her boots sinking into unfamiliar dust, she wondered if she had written her own ending before it even began. Her heart beat too fast. Her hands shook around the worn handle of her travel bag, and the fear she carried across half a country rose up and whispered, "What if he believes you?" She did not know it yet, but one quiet voice would answer that fear, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The stagecoach groaned as it rolled to a stop, its wheels grinding against packed earth. Eleanor Whitmore lifted her gaze and stared through the small window, barely breathing. Wooden buildings shimmered ahead, softened by heat and dust, as if the town itself might vanish if she blinked too hard. 24 years old. Nearly 2,000 miles from Pennsylvania, and about to meet a man she had only known through ink and paper. Her fingers tightened around her carpet bag. The leather was scuffed. The handle cracked. Everything she owned was inside it. Every hope, too. She had written to him for 8 months. Careful letters. Honest ones. She had told him she was not beautiful, that men back east rarely noticed her, that her features were ordinary, her shape unremarkable. She had wanted no illusions, no disappointment. What she never wrote was how deeply she feared being seen. The coach door opened. Warm air rushed in, thick with dust and unfamiliar scents. The driver called out their arrival, and the other passengers moved with practiced ease. Eleanor followed more slowly, her legs stiff, her stomach knotted tight. Her blue calico dress was wrinkled despite her efforts. She had sewn it herself by lamplight, each stitch neat, hoping that care might count for something even if beauty did not. She stepped down onto the street. The sun was harsher than she expected, even for early autumn. She raised a hand to shield her eyes. Men passed by on horseback. Boots struck wood. Somewhere, metal rang against metal. A dog trotted past, tongue lolling. And suddenly she realized she had no idea who she was looking for. Panic rose sharp and fast. What if he saw her and turned away? What if her honesty had not been enough? What if plain was all he could see? "Miss Whitmore!" The voice came from behind her, low, steady, not loud. She turned too quickly, her bag knocking against her leg. The man standing there stole the breath right out of her chest. He was taller than she expected. Broad across the shoulders in a way shaped by work, not comfort. His dark hair was wind-tossed, in need of a cut. His face was bronzed by sun, strong-jawed, shadowed with stubble. But it was his eyes that held her. Blue, clear, unguarded. He held his hat in both hands, fingers turning the brim as if he did not quite know what to do with them. "Yes," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. "I am Eleanor Whitmore." "I'm Samuel Cole," he said. "I'm glad you made it." He did not smile right away. Instead, his gaze moved over her face. Slowly, carefully. Eleanor braced herself. She waited for the flicker of regret, for the tightening around his mouth, for disappointment to settle in his eyes like dust. It never came. Something softened instead. A quiet warmth, almost wonder, crossed his expression. He took one small step closer, lowering his voice as if the moment belonged only to them. "You're beautiful," he whispered. The words landed like a held breath finally released. Heat rushed to her cheeks. I told you I was plain," she said quickly. "I wanted you to know the truth." "I didn't want." His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something gentler. "Then we see things different," he said. "Because plain isn't the word I'd choose." Her chest fluttered, fragile and unsteady. Hope felt dangerous. Hope always had. "I've got a wagon," he said, clearing his throat. "The ranch is about an hour from town. We can get supplies tomorrow. Thought you might want to see your home first." "Your home." The word sent a shiver through her. "That sounds fine," she said. He reached for her bag. Their fingers brushed, just briefly. But the warmth of it traveled up her arm and settled somewhere deep. "That all you've got?" he asked. "I have a trunk," she said. Everything I own. I'll get it. He lifted the heavy trunk from the coach as if it weighed nothing, handling it with care. Eleanor followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. He helped her up, his hand firm and steady at her elbow. As the wagon rolled forward, the town slowly passed by. A saloon spilling laughter. A general store with barrels on the porch. A small white church reaching up toward the sky. She tried to take it all in, this place that would shape her life. Dry creek's growing, Samuel said. Railroad brought folks in. It's decent. Mostly. Mostly, she echoed. He nodded. Like anywhere. Soon the buildings thinned, replaced by open land and wide sky. Sagebrush dotted the rolling ground. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks pale with lingering snow. The air smelled clean, untamed. It should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like breathing for the first time. "I've got about 300 acres," he said. "Cattle, a few horses, chickens, milk cow. The house is small but solid. Built it myself." "I wasn't expecting grand," Eleanor said. "I was hoping for honest." His shoulders eased at that. "That I can give." They rode on in companionable quiet until the road curved, and the ranch came into view. A modest house, a barn, a corral with horses lifting their heads. Samuel brought the wagon to a stop and helped her down. This time his hands lingered just a moment longer at her waist. "Welcome home," he said. Eleanor swallowed hard. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger. Tonight she stood on the edge of a life she had only dared to imagine. And for the first time, plain no longer felt like a truth she had to carry alone. She stood in the doorway a moment longer after he stepped back, as if the ground beneath her might shift if she moved too quickly. The ranch was quiet in a way she had never known. Not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that listened back. Samuel carried her trunk inside and set it at the foot of the larger bed. "I'll let you settle," he said. "I've got evening chores. Water's in the pitcher. There's bread and ham if you're hungry." "Thank you," Eleanor said. When the door closed behind him, the house seemed to exhale. She took slow steps through the rooms. 3 of them. Simple. Clean. The main room held a table, 4 chairs, a wood stove, shelves lined with dishes. Nothing fancy. Everything useful. A doorway led to a bedroom, with a quilt, folded tight at the foot of the bed. Another, smaller room held a narrow bed and a trunk. "I've been sleeping in there," he had said earlier. Her cheeks warmed again. She opened her trunk and unpacked slowly, touching each item as if grounding herself. Dresses. A brush. A small mirror. Her mother's silver locket. Her father's watch, long stopped but still precious. A thin book of poetry with softened pages. She placed them carefully on the bedside table. Pieces of a past finding a place in the present. By the time she washed the dust from her face and changed into a fresh green dress, the light outside had shifted, turning gold. She smoothed her hair, pinned it up, then paused. She looked at herself in the mirror. Still the same face. Freckles. Green eyes. Copper hair catching the light. Not plain. Not anymore. She stepped into the kitchen and found the food Samuel had mentioned. The familiar motion steadied her. Slicing bread. Pouring coffee grounds. Heating water. When he returned, the table was set. He stopped short in the doorway. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I wanted to," she replied. "Besides, I was too nervous to sit still." He laughed then, a real laugh, brief, honest. It softened his whole face. They ate together in an easy quiet. The food was simple. The moment was not. When they spoke, it was about small things. The road. The weather. The horses. Each word laid another board in the bridge forming between them. After supper, they sat on the porch. The sky darkened, stars pricking through one by one. Eleanor had never seen so many. They burned fierce and clear. "I could never go back east," she said softly. "Give it winter. Samuel replied. "You might change your mind." She smiled. "I don't think so." He grew serious then. "I'm glad you came." She looked at him. "So am I." Quote, they went inside when the cold settled. He banked the fire. She lit a lamp. When he said goodnight, his voice was careful, gentle. Sleep came slowly. Her thoughts tangled with fear and anticipation until dawn painted the room pale and new. She dressed in her best gown that morning, dove gray silk, carefully kept. She pinned her hair and fastened her mother's locket. When she stepped into the main room, Samuel was waiting. Clean clothes, damp hair, freshly shaved. His eyes widened just slightly. "You look lovely," he said. "So do you," she answered, surprised by her own confidence. "I have something for you," he said, crossing to the mantel. He opened a small box. Inside lay a simple gold band, worn smooth. "My grandmother's," he said. "I was saving it." Her throat tightened. "I would be honored." They married in the small white church at the edge of town. No crowd. Just a kind-eyed preacher and his family. The vows were simple. The promises were not. When Samuel kissed her, it was brief and reverent, enough to leave her breathless. On the ride back, he reached for her hand. Their fingers laced together. It felt natural, right. At the house, he helped her down, his hands firm at her waist. He didn't let go right away. "I won't rush you," he said. "I want you to feel safe." She reached up and touched his cheek, felt the rasp of stubble, the warmth beneath. "I do," she said. "I really do." That night, when she told him she did not want to wait, his restraint broke only enough to show how much it mattered. He was careful, patient. When he whispered that she was beautiful again, she believed him with her whole heart. Morning came softly. Days followed, then weeks. Work filled them. Good, honest work. Eleanor learned the rhythms of the ranch, the weight of water buckets, the satisfaction of bread rising, the quiet pride of sore muscles earned. Samuel taught her to ride, walked beside the horse until her fear loosened its grip. He never mocked, never hurried. At night they talked. About the past, about hopes, about fears spoken in the dark. 3 weeks after their wedding, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed orange into pink. "Do you regret coming?" he asked. She turned to him fully, took his hands. "Not for one moment." She took a breath. "I'm falling in love with you." He pulled her close, emotion fierce and unhidden. "I already have," he said. "I just didn't know how to say it." Winter came early and hard. Snow piled high, wind cut deep. They worked from dark to dark, leaning on each other. When they were snowed in, they talked for hours. Read aloud, played cards, held each other close against the cold. By spring she knew, deep in her bones. She was carrying his child, she told him with shaking hands. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, joy breaking through him unguarded and bright. They stood together on the porch, watching calves wobble into the world, knowing theirs would come soon. And Eleanor rested her hand on her growing belly, feeling both fear and wonder as a new chapter began to take shape. Spring deepened into summer, and Eleanor's body changed with the slow certainty of the land itself. Her dresses tightened across her belly. Her steps grew more careful. Samuel noticed everything, sometimes before she did. "Don't lift that," he would say, already moving to take the bucket from her hands. "I'm not made of glass," she would remind him gently. "I know," he'd answer, "but you're carrying everything that matters to me." The first time she felt the baby move, it startled her, a soft flutter, like wings brushing from the inside. She gasped and pressed her hand to her stomach, eyes wide. "Samuel," she whispered. He was beside her in an instant. "What is it?" Quote. She took his hand and placed it there. They waited. Nothing. Then again. A small, sure kick. His breath caught. He laughed once, broken and amazed. "That's our child," he said. "That's really our child." They stood like that for a long time, hands joined over her belly, the future moving quietly between them. They prepared the small back room for the baby. Samuel built a cradle, sanding it smooth until his hands were raw. Eleanor sewed tiny shirts and blankets, her stitches small and careful. They talked about names in the evenings, arguing softly until laughter replaced disagreement. By early autumn, the air cooled again. Eleanor's body felt heavy, stretched, and strange. Sleep came in pieces. Samuel woke whenever she did, bringing water, rubbing her back, never once complaining. The pains began just before dawn. At first, she thought it was only discomfort, a tightness low in her back. But it grew stronger, steadier. Samuel knew before she said a word. He saddled a horse and rode hard for the midwife, while Eleanor paced the room, breathing through the waves. By the time Mrs. Harlan arrived, the pain was sharp and relentless. The hours blurred together. Eleanor screamed. She cried. She clutched Samuel's hand until her fingers ached. He stayed with her, murmuring encouragement, his own face pale but determined. He never let go. When the baby finally arrived in the gray light of morning, his cry cut through the room like a promise. "A boy," the midwife said. Strong and healthy. Eleanor wept as they placed him on her chest. Dark hair, tiny fists, a warmth she had never known spread through her so completely it hurt. Samuel bent over them, tears streaking his face. "Thomas," he said softly. "Our Thomas." Those first weeks were exhausting, nights broken by cries, days blurred by fatigue, but joy threaded through it all. Eleanor watched Samuel cradle their son with a tenderness that stole her breath. She watched herself become someone new. Mother, wife, home. The years unfolded one season at a time. Thomas learned to walk between the kitchen table and Samuel's waiting arms. He learned to speak in half words and laughter. When Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again, fear came quieter this time, softened by confidence. Their daughter arrived in spring. Red-cheeked and fierce, they named her Lila. The ranch grew with them. More cattle, more land, a larger barn. Money was never plentiful, but it was enough. Always enough. Eleanor found her place among the other women scattered across the valley. They helped each other birth babies, mend clothes, bury the dead. They laughed together when they could and held each other when laughter failed. Samuel became known as a fair man. Quiet, dependable. When trouble came, he stood firm. When neighbors needed help, he rode without complaint. In the evenings, after the children slept, Eleanor and Samuel sat on the porch as they always had. Time changed them. Lines deepened. Hair grayed. But when he looked at her, she still saw the same certainty. "You're still beautiful," he would say. She would shake her head, smiling. "You're biased." "Maybe," he'd reply, "but I'm not wrong." When Thomas was 5 and Lila 3, Eleanor carried their third child. This one came quickly. Another daughter. Pale hair. Quiet eyes. They named her May. Life was not without sorrow. A harsh winter took cattle. Illness swept through town more than once. Eleanor buried friends too young. Samuel came home one evening limping badly after a fall that never fully healed. But they endured. They argued sometimes. About money, about work, about worry. But they always came back to each other, always talked it through, always chose each other again. Years passed. Children grew. Thomas took to ranch work naturally, strong and steady. Lila devoured books and spoke of teaching. May ran wild through the fields, fearless and laughing. One quiet evening, Eleanor leaned against Samuel's shoulder as the sky burned gold. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked. He smiled. "Every detail." "I thought I was invisible," she said softly. He tightened his arm around her. "I saw you." She turned to him then, heart full. "I love you," she said. "I think I always will." His voice was certain. "I know I will." The seasons continued their endless turning, and through them all, Eleanor no longer questioned her worth. She had been seen. She had been chosen. And she had built a life strong enough to last. Time did not rush them. It moved the way the land did, steady, unyielding, honest. By the time Thomas reached his teens, Samuel's hair had gone mostly gray. His limp worsened in cold weather, but his hands were still sure, his judgment steady. He rose earlier than most men and rested only when the work was done. Eleanor learned to read his fatigue the way she once read type blocks in her father's shop. A tightening in his jaw, a slower step. She adjusted without comment, took on more when she could, let him rest when he would allow it. Their children grew into themselves. Thomas was tall and quiet, like his father. He learned cattle work early and took pride in doing it right. Lila read everything she could get her hands on and asked questions that surprised grown men. May ran through the fields barefoot, hair flying, laughing like the wind could never catch her. The ranch expanded again. A new pasture, better fencing, a second barn built with Thomas at Samuel's side. Eleanor watched them work together and felt a swell of pride, so sharp it almost hurt. On evenings when the work ended early, neighbors gathered, sometimes to share a meal, sometimes just to talk. Eleanor became the woman others turned to when trouble came. She listened, she fed. She offered quiet words when none seemed enough. Samuel served a term helping settle disputes in town. He never raised his voice, never hurried judgment. People trusted him because he spoke only when he meant it. One summer, rustlers hit nearby ranches. Fear spread fast. Samuel rode with others to track them down. Eleanor waited, calm on the outside, restless within. When he returned safe but exhausted, she said nothing. She only held him longer that night. Life tested them, again and again. They lost calves, lost friends, lost sleep, lost certainty more than once. But they never lost each other. Years softened the sharp edge of passion into something deeper, something steadier. Samuel still reached for her in the night. Eleanor still leaned into his touch. Their love had learned patience. It had learned endurance. One winter evening, when the children were grown enough to be trusted alone for a while, Samuel slipped on ice and fell hard. The injury never healed right. His work slowed after that. "I hate being useless," he muttered one night. "You're not," Eleanor said firmly. "You're just human." Quote. He looked at her for a long moment. "You've always been stronger than you think." She smiled. "You taught me that." Thomas began taking on more responsibility. He did not resent it, he welcomed it. The ranch would be his one day, and he treated it with the same respect Samuel always had. Lila left for town to teach in a small schoolhouse. Eleanor cried when she went, then wiped her tears and packed bread for the journey. May followed her own path later, marrying a kind man who worked with his hands and laughed easily. The house grew quieter. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Thomas and his wife organized a gathering. Tables filled the yard. Neighbors came from miles away. Food stretched long into the evening. Stories were told and retold. Eleanor stood beside Samuel, watching children run through the grass, and felt something close to awe. "We did well," he said softly. She leaned into him. "We did." They danced slowly under lantern light, his movements careful, hers patient. When he rested his forehead against hers, she felt the weight of years and the strength beneath them. Later, when the guests left and silence returned, they stood on the porch and looked out over the land. "No regrets?" he asked. "Not one," she replied. Time pressed on. Samuel's body weakened, but his mind stayed sharp. Eleanor cared for him with the same devotion he had once shown her. Their roles shifted without bitterness, only gratitude. On a warm afternoon late in summer, they sat together watching the fields sway. "I need you to know something," Samuel said, voice quiet. She turned to him, took his hand. "That day at the stage," he continued, "my heart knew before my mind did. You were the one." Tears filled her eyes. "I felt it too," she whispered. They sat until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose. The beauty never grew ordinary. Samuel passed 2 years later, peacefully, in his sleep. Eleanor's grief was deep and aching. She mourned not only the man she loved, but the life they had lived together. Yet, even in her sorrow, gratitude remained. She wore his grandmother's ring every day. She lived 10 more years, long enough to see grandchildren born, long enough to tell the story again and again, of letters, of faith, of a man who saw her when she could not see herself. When she passed, her children buried her beside Samuel on the hill, overlooking the ranch. The stone was simple, their names carved side by side, beloved, together, always. And around them, life went on. The house did not feel empty after Samuel was gone. It felt full, full of his boots by the door, full of the chair where he had sat each evening, full of the quiet habits they had shaped together over a lifetime. Eleanor moved through the days slowly at first. She rose with the sun out of habit, brewed coffee she often forgot to drink, and stood on the porch watching the land wake. The ranch no longer belonged to her hands, but it still belonged to her heart. Thomas ran it now. He did it well. He came by most mornings to check on her, sometimes with one of his sons in tow. The boys were loud and curious and full of questions. Eleanor loved them fiercely. She loved the way Samuel lived on in their faces, in the tilt of a chin, in the calm way they listened. Lila visited when school allowed. She brought books and stories of children learning to read. Eleanor listened with pride, recognizing the same quiet determination she had once carried across the country. May came less often, but when she did, she filled the house with laughter and motion, her presence a reminder that joy could still surprise. In the evenings, Eleanor took out the small wooden box she kept tucked away. Inside were letters, her letters, Samuel's. Ink faded. Paper worn soft with age. She read them slowly. There was her first letter, careful and restrained, apologizing for her plainness. There was his reply, practical but kind. A single line near the end that always made her pause. I believe beauty lives in honesty. She smiled every time. She also kept her journal, the one she had written in during the early years. Weather notes, births, losses, small triumphs, but threaded through it all were reflections on love, written by a woman who had learned her worth through living. One entry, dated only a month after her arrival, read, I came west expecting duty and found devotion. Another, years later, I am no longer afraid of being seen. These pages became treasures, passed from hand to hand, read by daughters and granddaughters who found strength in her words, who saw in her journey a truth they needed for their own lives. That self-doubt could be unlearned, that love could grow from honesty, that courage sometimes looked like boarding a stage with trembling hands. The ranch itself carried memory. The oak tree still stood strong, its branches wide. The swing Samuel built creaked under the weight of children who had never known him, yet laughed because of him. The garden Eleanor planted was tended by new hands every year. Someone always made sure flowers bloomed there. The original house remained, expanded, improved, but the main room stayed much the same. The table where their first meal had been shared still stood, polished smooth by decades of use. The ring Samuel gave her never left the family. It passed to Thomas's wife, then onward, always given to the bride who married in, always accompanied by the story, not just of love, but of seeing. Years turned into more years. Eleanor's steps slowed. Her hands trembled sometimes. But her mind stayed clear, her spirit steady. She spent her afternoons telling stories to grandchildren gathered at her feet. Did you really travel all that way alone? They would ask. Yes, she'd answer. And I was terrified. Were you scared to marry Grandpa Samuel? Very, she'd say. But fear doesn't always mean stop. Sometimes it means step forward. On her last birthday, they gathered again, the house full, the air warm. Eleanor sat in her chair, wrapped in a shawl, listening to voices layered over one another. Later, when the house quieted, She asked Thomas to help her to the porch. They sat together, watching the sky turn soft with evening. "Your father once asked me if I had regrets," she said. "And?" "I never did," she replied. "Not once." She passed peacefully in her sleep not long after. Her children honored her wishes. She was laid to rest beside Samuel, on the hill where the wind moved gently through the grass. The stone bore their names. Nothing more was needed. Years later, when Thomas grew gray and his sons took over, the story was still told. Around fires, at tables, on quiet evenings when the past felt close. It was told because it mattered, because it reminded them that their family began with a woman who thought herself ordinary and a man who saw her clearly, with letters written in faith, with a whisper spoken in truth. The town grew, changed, time reshaped it, but the ranch remained. And sometimes, on still nights, those who lived there said the house felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire, as if love, once given fully, never truly left. The story did not end with Eleanor's last breath. It softened. It spread. Long after the stone was set on the hill and the grass grew tall around it, the life she and Samuel built continued to move through the land like an unseen current. Thomas aged into his father's place with quiet grace. His back grew broader, then stooped, his hair silvered. His sons took over the hardest work, and he learned what Samuel once had, that letting go was not the same as losing. Lila's schoolhouse expanded. Children came from miles away. Some arrived hungry, some arrived barefoot. All of them left knowing how to read, because she believed knowledge was a kind of freedom. May's children ran wild when they visited the ranch. They climbed the oak tree. They swung high and fearless. Eleanor's stories lived on in their games, even when they did not know her name. The house changed again and again. New walls, new roofs, new laughter, but certain things were never moved. The tables stayed, the rocking chairs stayed. The window, where Eleanor once watched the light turn gold, stayed. The letters stayed too. They were kept in a family Bible, wrapped carefully in cloth. When a child grew old enough to understand, someone would take them out and read them aloud. They would hear Eleanor's careful words, her doubt, her honesty. They would hear Samuel's reply, steady and sure. And always, the same line lingered in the air after, "I believe beauty lives in honesty." Those words shaped generations. When one granddaughter stood before a mirror, unsure of herself, her mother told her the story. When a grandson feared choosing the wrong path, his father told him about faith and courage. When someone loved imperfectly and doubted they were enough, the story was told again. Because it was not really about the past. It was about how to live. The hill where Eleanor and Samuel were buried became a place of quiet visits. Sometimes flowers were laid. Sometimes nothing at all. Just hands resting on stone. Just silence and wind and memory. The inscription never changed. Beloved. Together. Always. On certain evenings, when the sky burned rose and gold, someone would swear the air felt different there. Warmer. Gentler. As if the love that once lived so fiercely had soaked into the earth and refused to fade. Eleanor's journals were passed carefully from one woman to the next. Not to be owned, but to be borrowed. To be learned from. One entry, written late in her life, became a favorite. "I once believed I was plain because no one had taken the time to truly see me. Love did not change my face. It changed my understanding of myself." Those words were copied, memorized, carried far beyond the ranch. Years became decades. The Wild West turned into history. Dusty roads became paved. The town grew louder, busier, brighter, but the ranch remained a place of grounding, of return. And still, the story was told. about a woman who boarded a stage with trembling hands, about a man who waited with quiet hope, about a whisper that changed everything. When new brides married into the family, they were given the ring, always with the same words spoken. This was given in faith, wear it in truth. The ring passed on, the story passed on, the lesson passed on. That love does not begin with perfection. That courage can look like honesty. That being truly seen is the greatest gift one human can give another. And somewhere in the telling, someone would always pause and say, "She thought she was plain." And someone else would always answer, "And he knew she wasn't." That was how Eleanor and Samuel lived on. Not as legends carved in stone, but as quiet proof that ordinary beginnings could lead to extraordinary lives. Their love did not roar. It endured. It endured in the land, in the family, in every heart that learned to see a little more clearly because of them. And so the story ends where it always belonged, with faith rewarded, with love chosen, with two lives joined by a single, gentle truth.